December 26, 1973, the day after Christmas. 26 theaters around the United States held the theatrical release of one of the scariest films of all times, The Exorcist. Ticket lines were extremely long, often stretching around the block, causing people to wait for hours in cold weather. The attraction crowd so large that they sometimes caused disturbances, requiring police intervention. The lines, driven by the book's popularity, word of mouth, and the film's controversial and terrifying nature, created a mania. Once inside the theater, the film was so shocking that audiences reacted with fainting, screaming, and mass exits. Some grew so ill by the graphic nature of the film, they threw up in the aisles. News crews waited in the lobby to interview horrified patrons as they fled the movie. Often, the part that made most squirm to the breaking point was when the devil began to speak through Reagan. Weeks after the film's debut, the Catholic Church saw a spike in attendance all over the country, as well as requests for exorcisms. The controversial and terrifying movie was based off the book The Exorcist by William Blatty. The book was based on a case from 1949 that involved a 14-year-old boy referred to as Roland Doe. This is his story. Roland was a typical teenager, a little high-strung and a bit of a prankster, but a very loved child by his parents and his Aunt Harriet, whom he was very close with. Roland was an only child and lived in a charming home in Cottage City, Maryland. Roland's Aunt Harriet was a spiritualist, and she introduced her nephew to the Ouija board and the practice of contacting the dead. Tragedy struck, and Aunt Harriet passed away. Struggling with the loss of his beloved aunt, Roland began using the Ouija board to try and contact her spirit. On January 15, 1949, Roland's mom began to hear scratching noises coming from the walls. They had an exterminator come into the home, trying to find the source, but nothing was found. Writing the noises off as maybe some type of prank by their son, 11 days later, the Doe house would experience furniture moving, vases levitating, and more disturbing events when Roland was in the room. Later, the episode seemed to be confined to Roland's bedroom. As Roland prepared for sleep, thunderous sounds like battle troops were heard as if charging for his bed. His mother, knowing Roland had been trying to contact his aunt, spoke aloud. "Harriet, is that you? If it is, knock 3 times. 3 knocks came. Then over the next few evenings, events escalated further. February of 1949, Roland had become plagued by nightmares, waking in the middle of the night, violently screaming, but not in his own voice, but a twisted voice, deep and growling. His parents would rush into his room, finding their son convulsing as his bed would shake violently. Chairs would spin and dishes would move. Fearing their son had some type of disorder such as epilepsy, they took Roland to every specialist they could find. Medical doctors found nothing wrong with the boy. They then sought out psychiatrists. Nothing was found. Psychologists. Nothing. Finally, Mr. and Mrs. Doe turned to the family Reverend Scholes. The Does were Lutheran, and Reverend Scholes was interested in parapsychology. After conversing with the family and learning of the events in their home, the Reverend began to believe the Doe home had fallen victim to a poltergeist. Wanting to observe Roland outside of the home, he arranged for a sleepover. On February 17, 1949, Roland spent an evening with the Reverend. The day was normal, but at bedtime, as Roland climbed into the bed began to shake. The Reverend asked Roland to move to the armchair. The chair began to shake violently and tipped Roland onto the floor. Reverend Schultz then took the mattress off the bed frame and put it on the floor. And as Roland lay down to sleep, the mattress began to slide around the room with a terrified Roland. Then, shrieking in pain, 3 scratches began to manifest on Roland's body. After experiencing 4 different nights with Roland and not in his family home, no longer thinking the Doe family had a poltergeist, Reverend Schultz refers the family to the local Catholic priest, Father Hughes, for help, citing that the Catholics had more knowledge in dealing with this type of occurrence. On February 27, 1949, Father Hughes met with the Doe family and spoke with Roland. During this meeting, Roland's demeanor changed. The room grew cold, the phone flew off the hook, and a deep, low voice spoke from Roland. "Why bother me, you priest of hell?" Knowing a demonic spirit had taken hold of the young boy, Father Hughes contacted Archbishop O'Boyle of Washington for permission to perform an exorcism. On March 1st, 1949, and under an assumed name, Roland was taken to a Georgetown hospital and strapped to a bed. The exorcism rites began as Father Hughes began to pray. Violently fighting his restraints, Roland managed to free one of his arms. He pries a metal spring from his bed and slashes at Father Hughes, slicing him from shoulder to wrist. No longer able to go on with the exorcism and needing at least 100 stitches, Father Hughes is maimed. Upon discharge from the hospital, the family and Roland fall into despair. And later that evening, bloody scratches appeared on Roland's chest with the words, Lewis. Believing this is a sign, the family packed up and moved to St. Louis, where his beloved Aunt Harriet had lived and Roland's uncle still resided. On March 8, 1949, the Does arrived at Roland's brother's home on Roanoke Drive in St. Louis, Missouri. Roland's uncle were devout Catholics, and the Does prayed that they had somehow left the evil tormenting Roland in Maryland. But as Roland prepares for bed, the familiar torments began. Witnessing the horrific events happening to her cousin, days later on a college campus, she asked Father Raymond Bishop to please meet with Roland. Father Bishop agrees and brings Father William Bowdern with him. On March 11, 1949, just 10 days since the first attempted exorcism on Roland, two priests meet with him. They observe him at bedtime, and with nothing happening, men leave around 11 p.m. Once they leave the home, the terror begins again. Loud noises start up. A bottle of holy water left on the nightstand flies across the room, and a bookcase slides to block access to the room. The priest quickly returned, and the next day contact Archbishop Ritter for permission to perform the rites of exorcism once again. On March 16, 1949, Father Bowdern and two other priests, Father Bishop and Father Holleran, begin the exorcism. With fear and trembling, a battle begins. Father Bishop is asked to keep a detailed diary of all the events. Laying hands upon the boy and in prayer, scratches once again appear on Roland's body. Screaming in pain, Roland recoils. The priests continue their prayers using holy sacraments and holy water. Epic spiritual war rages on. The word help slowly appears branded onto Roland's chest. The priests battle for 9 hours, and Roland collapses in exhaustion. The exorcism continues when the sun sets, and 2 days later, Roland appears to be his normal, happy self during the day. But on night 3, Roland turns into a snarling shadow of himself. Begging for the window to be opened, he begins to make violent retching sounds and screams, "He is going, he is going." Only hours later to scream in terror, "He is coming back, he is coming back." The battle begins again, and the priests are shaken to their cores. The priests experience unnatural voices, sounds, violence, and even the levitation of furniture. After a full week of grueling exorcisms and the fear of the entire family's safety, on March 23rd, the priests moved Roland to the rectory at St. Francis Xavier in St. Louis, Missouri, close to the proximity of St. Louis University. The students begin to take notice of the strange occurrences at St. Francis, the screams and the animal noises happening late at night, the lights flickering. The exorcism continues. 3 days later, still unable to subdue the 14-year-old demon-possessed Roland, and too much public curiosity, Roland is once again taken back to his family's home. A small break of calm happens, and Roland becomes plagued with a constant need to write. The letters are hard to read. "I will sleep for 10 days, but will return after 4 days are up. I am the devil himself." The priests are worn out, exhausted. Their faith is strained. Father Bowdern has lost almost 40 pounds. On April 1st, 1949, 1 month since the first attempted exorcism in Maryland, Father Bowdern suggests Roland be baptized. Fighting and kicking, the 3 priests manage to hold him down despite his superhuman strength and baptize him. Father Bowdern, fearing for Roland's health, asks that he be admitted to the Alexian Brothers Hospital in St. Louis, run by an ancient order of monks. Roland is quietly admitted to the psych ward, and there the battle for Roland continues. Roland's violence increases, he levitates, the priests continue. On April 16, 1949, the day before Easter, a statue of St. Michael is placed in Roland's room. Several days later, demanding the demon reveal his name, the demon speaks, declaring that he will never leave Roland until Roland speaks the word he will never say. Suddenly, Roland experiences the most violent fit, and during this fit, Roland has a vision. St. Michael is there with his flaming sword and a pitchfork, forcing the demons back to hell. St. Michael looks at Roland in the vision and speaks the word Dominus. Dominus means Lord. The seizures suddenly stop. A calm Roland opens his eyes and looks at Father Bowderin and says it's over. The priest remains skeptical and prays for a sign. As he finishes his prayer, a boom shakes the hospital, and the priests back at St. Francis report an image of St. Michael. Roland was free. 48 different eyewitnesses signed off on the case of Roland Doe. The Vatican locked the final report in their archives, and in 1978, a copy of Father Bishop's diary of the exorcism is found during the demolition of the psych ward of the Alexian Brothers Hospital. Roland, or his real name, Ronald Edwin Hunkler, grew up, worked for NASA, and named his first son Michael. But rumors persist. Demons are said to jump to one another during exorcism, especially if they cannot go back to their original host, and persistent rumors swirl that the demon that plagued Roland jumped into a priest who lived at Alexian Brothers. And to prevent the demon from jumping to another, the monks locked the priest in the psychiatric ward until his death. What are demons that they seem to crave and dwell in the flesh of the living? Welcome to Rebel Road. I'm Mary.
And I'm Haley. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Rebel Road. We are still figuring out all of this podcasting lifestyle, and it means so much to us that you choose to listen to us, even when sometimes it sounds like we're using a potato to record with. So thank you. Today's topic is one that you would think to be black and white, but as you'll hear, is not. And today we are talking about demons.
You know, that word demon has a bit of a checkered history, and it has distorted in some ways. The word has become all-encompassing in this black and this white, good versus evil thing. But Haley, if I asked you what a demon was, what would you say?
Well, you know, Mary, I think my first thought goes to Satan, the devil, of course. Fallen angels. I don't know, just demons specifically. I would have to say I probably never sat down and really thought, what is a demon? You know, in the faith that we grew up in, there were a lot of illustrations with the Bible. But if you think about it, not a whole lot of illustrations when it comes to demons, because I guess I was just always taught that they were fallen angels.
Right, a fallen angel. And, you know, that's what we both were taught from our childhood religion. We have the same religion in our background. And even as I got older and attended a different non-denominational church, that's what they taught as well. And it wasn't until I began researching the Bible on my own and digging deeper and going outside of what like a normal doctrine would teach, outside of that cookie cutter faith that we can find in all the churches today, was it that I discovered that it was something different. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't go to a church. I'm just saying that you should do your own research and you should ask the questions. Find a good church home, one that stands on, sound doctrine and biblical morals, but one also that has a pastor who's not afraid of unconventional rebel theologies. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So I'm sensing that you're steering us a little away from fallen angels as demons, which is going to cause some of our listeners and myself to have a little bit of a headache. That's a lot to process and think about.
I know it is a big thing to say that fallen angels aren't really demons. And like I said in the beginning, that word demon kind of has an all-encompassing thing, but we're going to specifically focus on what the Bible has to say. So don't reach for the aspirin just yet. I just want to challenge our listeners to follow along and really think about what we're going to say. You know, the subject of demons is absolutely no easy topic, and we could branch off into a million different directions with it. But I want to attack it from a biblical view. And I know that some of our listeners maybe don't like that, but it is a cornerstone in understanding what demons are, and from that, other beings that we view as evil.
Okay, so today we're having a little Bible study here on the Rebel Road podcast. Mary, you want to keep going?
Well, any good scholar or researcher is going to use the books that they have at hand and then branch out into other books. So, yeah, we're going to have a little bit of a Bible study, but not in a sense that you might be used to. It's just no Sunday school class or sermon. So just kind of bear with me, everybody, and keep listening.
Yeah, well, Mary and I, we have lots of Bible studies under our belt. So, but Mary, I'm always ready to learn something new. So show us those demons. Let's talk about those demons in the Bible. We like to say Jesus was a bit of a rebel. And I think maybe that's a trend that will continue here on this podcast because Jesus was, but he was also an exorcist. In Matthew 8:30 through 31, that's where Jesus encountered some demon possessed men and they begged to be cast out into the pigs. So Jesus granted their requests and cast them out into the pigs.
Yeah. And, Haley, that is a perfect starting off point for this episode. Possession, much like in our opening story. So today we still have exorcisms and deliverance ministries that are all throughout the church as a whole, and their sole purpose is to remove demons from physical forms. In the New Testament, we find there are several examples of demon possession, and in almost every instance of a demon, the ideal and fear of possession isn't too far from it, wouldn't you say? So demons crave something to live in. So we could rightly conclude that they don't have a physical body of their own. They are a type of spirit, and specifically, they are an unclean spirit.
Okay. So if demons don't have physical bodies, it's kind of clicking here because if they did have bodies, like we sometimes picture them, the Hollywood image, the horns and the black wings and such. If they had bodies, how do they possess someone? Do they leave their body? And that just doesn't really make sense.
Exactly. It doesn't make sense, but I don't think people really think about that. So again, if we look into the Bible, but this time we're going to go to the Old Testament, we find that demons aren't really mentioned. Instead, we find the terms like evil spirits, foreign gods, and the term Shadim is used. We have to remember that the Bible wasn't written for our Western mindset and culture. It was for the people of that time. So the Jews back in Jesus' day would have read these older books that are found in the New Testament, and they instantly would have related the evil spirits mentioned to those of the dead Nephilim or giants.
Exactly what we covered in our last episode. So for any of our listeners, if you guys missed our last episode or just didn't get a chance to listen to that yet, stop this one and go back and listen to episode 3. But if you don't want to do that, I'll just do a really quick recap. So the Nephilim were the offspring of fallen angels and humans. And the Nephilim, or giants, they were considered to be demigods. They were worshipped and were the reason for the flood. They were full of evil and they defiled everything they touched, the land, humans, and the animals.
Right. So let's dig into that just a little bit deeper. If someone who knows Jesus die, we say they go to heaven, right? And then on the other hand, if someone who doesn't know the Lord dies, we say that they go the other direction, right? Right. Okay. So now we have to look at the Nephilim and the giants. They were corrupt living beings that were half angels and half humans. And so when they die, where would their spirit go? They wouldn't go to heaven necessarily because they weren't created by God. So where would they go?
Well, I've got no idea, Mary. They were considered unclean, right?
Right. And so the Bible and other manuscripts leave us to believe that their spirits, that is, those of the hybrids, were instead left to wander the earth, because in the book of Enoch, and I know some people frown at the book of Enoch because it's not in the Bible, it's not included in the canon, but to get the full feeling of what people thought in their mindset, you have to look to these outside books. And so in 1 Enoch 15:8, it says, "And now the giants who were born from body and flesh will be called evil spirits on the earth, and on the earth will be their dwelling." So the Jews of that time would have read that. So they knew that the Nephilim, or the giants who died, they didn't go to heaven, but they dwelled still on the earth. and that is what they called the evil spirits.
Okay, so now we have these powerful, unclean beings, some human like, some animal like, who were worshipped like gods. And they were in a spirit form loose on the earth. So the Nephilim or giants, they were very carnal in nature. You have that craving from a body to inhabit, to have that flesh again. And that kind of makes so much sense.
And if you look to pagan god worship, all these building of idols for these gods, people weren't stupid, like a lot of people want to say, like they were just backwards. They didn't know anything. They really didn't think that these stone idols that they were building, or these giant wooden whatevers, or these golden things, these deities that they were making, they didn't think that those were their God. But they did believe that by building it, the spirits of their God would possess it. And usually they would come in through their mouth. And that is why they would often sacrifice right there on the idols, because the spirit of the gods that they were worshiping were inhabiting these idols.
So when demons or the evil and unclean spirits don't have a host body, what are they doing? I would guess that they're just wandering the earth.
That's exactly what they do. And we can find proof of that, again, if we go to our Bibles and if we look at Matthew 12, verse 43. And I'll just read it. It says, when an impure spirit comes out of a person, it goes through arid places seeking rest and does not find it. So that term arid can mean desert or a place where life is not. So it could also possibly be a reference to the underworld, to hell, but it indicates that these spirits can come and go. And in the Old Testament, there were areas where God's people were forbidden to go because they were full of sinister and unholy gods. So if we go back to the Jewish traditions, do you know what Yom Kippur is?
The Day of Atonement. The first was when Moses came down from Mount Sinai with a second set of stone tablets, and they marked that occasion, I think. Is that right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And we can find that celebration in Leviticus 16. But I want to talk about the two goats that were sacrificed. They would take these two goats, and one would be sacrificed to Yahweh, and the second went to someone called Azazel. And the one to Yahweh was sacrificed, but the one to Azazel, they sent that off into the desert. So if Yahweh was the living God, who the heck is this Azazel person, right? If we look in there, Azazel can mean scapegoat, but in the original Hebrew, it's identified as a proper name, much like Yahweh. So it's important to make the distinction. They weren't sacrificing to this Azazel, but they were rather returning to him what belonged to him, which was sin, or basically they were returning evil back to its source, which was returned to the desert or wilderness. And that is a place where demons were believed to exist. And that was the realm of the dead. And it was said that the demons could come and go through the fissures and the holes in the earth. And earlier, where did demons go when they were exorcised?
To the arid places like the desert.
Right. And to further maybe drive this home, the demons are disembodied spirits of the Nephilim. So if we go back to Genesis 3, you remember the serpent deceived Adam and Eve, and now God is banishing them from the Garden of Eden. So this is Genesis 3:14 through 15, and I'm just going to go ahead and read that again. So the Lord God said to the serpent, because you have done this, cursed you are above all livestock and all wild animals. You will crawl on your belly, and you will eat dust and all the days of your life. And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel. Did you notice anything odd about that, Haley? I know we've read it 100 times before, but just kind of read it again.
Okay. The Lord God said to the serpent, because you have done this, cursed are you above all livestock and all wild animals. You will crawl on your belly, and you will eat dust all the days of your life. And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel. Okay, the serpent was going to have offspring, and that would be the enemy of man.
Right. And so, what shining ones do we know that have had offspring? Remember, the word for snake that's used in Genesis was nakash, and it had several layered meanings. And one of those meanings was the shining one.
Okay, so that means the fallen angels.
And the word enmity, that's used in that scripture. And the definition is the state or feeling of being actively opposed or hostile to someone or something. What are demons always doing besides trying to possess something?
Well, I think it's something that we've been talking about ever since we had the idea to do this podcast. And that is simply the fact that demons oppress, they are destructive. The enemy will always come to steal, kill, and destroy. Dang it, it kind of sounds like the giants of old.
It's completely what it is. So the Bible also shows us that these unclean spirits are often filled with great strength. Have you heard of a demon-possessed person not having unnatural strength? In Revelation, there's the mention of the locust spirits that are led by a fallen angel called Abaddon. But these spirits are said to have tails like scorpions. So if we look at Luke 10, verse 19, Jesus gave his disciples the authority to trample on serpents and scorpions and over all the power of the enemy, and nothing shall by any means hurt you.
That's a lot, Mary. So what about the fallen angels? What are they?
They are just that, Haley. They are fallen angels. Somehow their identity has been lumped into this species of evil demons. We are taught that demons are in the black suits and the good guys are in the white suits. So everything just kind of gets lumped into this giant demon category. They made their choice. They turned against heaven. They just aren't the demons that the Bible talks about. And again, if you read your Bibles, angels are never called or associated with unclean spirits or evil spirits or even the word demons. So let's contrast that a little bit.
Well, we know angels have bodies. We see that over and over again. And Hebrews says, don't forget to show hospitality because you might be entertaining angels.
And angels were often messengers from God. We see in the Bible time and time again, they ate, they slept, they traveled, they appeared like men. So angels, even fallen angels, have the ability to either create for themselves or they just naturally have a physical form that is with them. And sometimes we read they are ministering spirits, but most of the time they have some type of form.
Angels also come and go from heaven to earth. Demons seem to only be able to wander on earth and into hell. And an unclean spirit would never be allowed into the heavenly realm. Is that right, Mary?
Absolutely not. So that's another, tick in the column for when the Nephilim died, when these hybrids died, where did their spirits go? Well, if it's an unclean spirit, it's not going into heaven. So it's going to be doomed to walk on earth. So let's finish this point with the angels. The Bible will always make a distinction when talking about the fallen angels. In 2 Peter, we read, God spared the angels that sinned. In Jude 1:6, it says, the angels who kept not their first estate. And in Matthew 25, it says, the fire prepared for the devil and his angels. It doesn't say the devil and his demons. So every time a fallen angel or an angel that's been cast out is mentioned, there's a distinction made there. And in Galatians 1:8, if anyone, including an apostle or an angel, preaches a gospel contrary to the one we preach to you, they should be accursed or condemned. Again, that word angel is used in negative connotations, but it's never used to where they say demons or unclean spirits or evil spirits. They just use words before it so that we always know that it's an angel that they're talking about, even if it's a fallen angel or a cast down angel. These angels, they still retain their original creation and their power, even though they're no longer able to operate it in the heavenly realms anymore.
Yeah, that's so interesting, Mary, because the fact that they still retain that original creation, the power and authority to even really still go to the heavenly realms is really, I think, overlooked. So the scripture that says we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. I never noticed that it cites two places that we wrestle against: the dark world and the heavenly realms, demons and fallen angels.
There is just a lot more to branch out on this subject. But for today's episode, I really just wanted to make that distinction between the fallen angels and the unclean spirits, who are, I am, and this could just be my own opinion, but there are other people who believe this too, that the unclean spirits, that is, these spirits of the dead giants and Nephilim, those hybrid creatures between angels and humans, those are what are actually demons. And so if you just use the word demon loosely, then sure, you could lump fallen angels in there. You could call those demons. The word demon just conjures up the impression of evil. But angels, even though they have fallen, they are divine beings created differently than us by God. So they are more than those parasitic spirits that are trying to cause chaos and are always trying to possess humans because they don't have that flesh of theirs anymore. And they were very carnal when they died. And so they're always craving to get back into that flesh so they can experience those carnal desires again. And so, where the fallen angels work on large scale deceptions and manipulations, think principalities, angels are smart. They are angelic beings. But demons, they seem to war against just humans and each other. Principalities, so that would be the fallen angels, they war against kingdoms and nations. The demons make it personal.
Yeah, I liked that you referred to them as parasitic spirits, because it really is so true. Even when you think back to our episode 1, when we were talking about evil and the uninvited. But Mary, there's different types of demons, right?
Haley, there's this quote that says, demons are more numerous than us, and they stand over us like mounds of earth. I think there are more types of demons than we can imagine. I think off the top of my head, we have those locust spirits. And when we think of a swarm of locusts, that's just too many to count. I think that would have to be the disembodied spirits of those dead giants and Nephilim. So that would be the men of legend or renown. And then we have territorial spirits, and those I think would be the Sidim, and those would still be the dead spirits of the giants and the Nephilim, but those would be the more powerful ones, the ones that were the dead gods and the demigods. And then we have this like pseudo demon spirit, and I think these might actually be angels. I'm not sure, but these can be linked to the elements and the forces of nature. So each type of spirit would have the characteristics of its living counterpart. So, like I said, I think there's just more demons than we understand that there are. This is a good quote. It says, each and every one of us has 1,000 demons on our left and 10,000 to his right. So I don't think we could say how many different types of demons there are, because it's like asking how many different types of personalities are there in humans.
That's an actually very powerful quote if you think about it. I just have so many more questions, and I would be willing to bet some of our listeners do too. And if you're listening and you do have a question, there's a couple ways that you could reach out and contact us. Look for our show notes. And also there is a link that you can click on to send us a text. And so that's another way that you can get a message over to us.
We will try to answer some of your questions on an episode in the future, or reach out by email if we happen to get that from you. But our next episode is going to keep branching into this topic, but we're going to be focusing on angels and those fallen angels and those cast down angels. So as always, we want to thank you for listening. Please, please be sure to subscribe, save, and share this episode. And if you haven't, would you please take a moment and leave us a review? It really helps the podcast to grow, and it pushes us up higher in that algorithm so more people can find us.
Yeah. And we love to talk. So the more people that listen, the more we get to talk, right, Mary? So,
right.
Yeah. So if you haven't yet, also listen to our newest Road Snack episode, where all month in December, we're talking about Christmas cryptids and the dark side of the Christmas season. And a lot of people don't realize that there's a very dark side to Christmas. So until next time, keep it weird and pull it back to Jesus.
Bye.
Bye.